Good
evening, everyone. This week's Parshat is Noach, Tavshin Pei Hey, and we will be starting Perek Test Chapter 9, Pasuk Yud Ches, verse 18. Now, this is after the flood. Flood's over. Vayu v'nei Noach hayotzim min hateva Shem v'Cham v'Yafes. The sons of Noach that came out from the ark were Shem and Cham and Yafes. V'Chamu avi Canaan. Cham was the father of someone named Canaan. That was his son, which is Noach's grandson. Shloish Eila b'nei Noach. These are the three sons of Noach. Me'ela nafsa chol haaretz. And it is from these that the land spread out, meaning the fact that people then spread out over the earth and occupied it, that they all came from these three sons. Vayachal Noach ish adama. Noach began to be a man of the earth, meaning he began to work the land. Vayita karmen, he planted a vineyard. Vayesh ben hayayin vayishkar, he drank from the wine and he became drunk. Vayiskal basach aloi, and he uncovered himself, he undressed himself within his tent. Vayarcham avi Canaan es ervas aviv. Cham, the father of Canaan, saw the ervas aviv. The ervas aviv means his father's nakedness. Vayagei l'shnei echad bachutz, and he told his two brothers who were outside. Vayikach Shem vayefes es hasimla. So Shem and Yefes, the other two sons, took the garment. Vayasim al Shem shneyem, they laid it upon both their shoulders. Vayelchoy charanes, and walked backward. Vayechasem eservas haviem, and they covered their father's nakedness. Ufneim al chayranis, their faces were turned backwards. Servas haviem lo yira'u, they did not see the nakedness of their father. So this is where Shem and Yefes acted to protect the honor of their father. The father had become drunk. He had basically, he debased himself, and they went to cover up how he had lowered himself. Okay, so it's going to be on this verse that we're going to focus. We're going to focus on what Shem and Yefes did, which says what they did. But I want to share with you a very interesting comment about the reward they received for what they did. Okay, and in order to do this, I'm going to share with you a comment from the commentary Rabbeinu Bachya in Vayikra. All the way we're going to jump to Vayikra, and we're going to go to Parshat Shmini, which is Vayikra Yud, Vayikra chapter 10. Which talks about the death of Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu. And the Torah tells us that what did they do? Vayikchu bnei Aaron Nadav Avihu ish machtasai. The sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, took each man his fire pan. Vayitnu behen eish, and they put fire in it. They put hot coals in it. V'simu leha k'tayres, they placed upon the fire incense. Vayakribu lefnei Hashem eish zara, and they offered before God an alien fire, asher leitziva oisam, that they were not commanded about. V'ateitze eish v'lefnei Hashem, and a fire went out from before God. V'atoyech oisam, it consumed them. V'yamus lefnei Hashem, and they died before God. Remember this story? Okay, this is talking about the death of the two sons of Aaron. So Rabbeinu Bachya makes a very interesting comment about exactly how they died. Now, if I were to ask you, it says a fire came out and consumed them. So, what do you think that means? How would you, just looking at those words, what would you say it means?
There's nobody.
A fire came down and burned them up, right? So, says the Rebbeinu Bachya, that's not what it means. And he explains like this. When his pasuk says, so first he begins, Chatu ba'esh v'laku ba'esh. They sinned with fire, and they were punished with fire. And the death mentioned in the verse that says they died before Hashem, there was a separation of the soul from the body. The fire entered their bodies through their nostrils, which is, he brings down later, To say that there's a medrash that says that. V'az nifreda nafsha migufam. And then when that happened, their souls separated from their body. The souls departed from the body and they died. So the fire from heaven entered into their nostrils, and then their souls departed. Now, okay. So right now we're talking. The way he says it is that the fires went into their nostrils, and the souls departed. Now, when the fire went inside, right? Did it burn anything?
Yeah.
You say yeah.
No.
Says the Reinbach, yeah. So what did it burn? Everything. So he says like this. Maybe it means that their souls were burned. I mean, this is a fire from heaven. It doesn't say it. It said it went into their nostrils. It means it went inside of them. And he's going to say soon, we know that their bodies were not touched. Their bodies weren't affected. Something happened inside. So you might think that what it means is that their neshamas were burned. He says, chas v'shalom. You should not say that. Why? When Hashem said, when this happened, Moshe said to Aaron that Hashem said, "B'kroivai ekodesh." Through those who are close to me, I shall be sanctified. So says Rabbeinu Bachya, if Nadav and Avi are called kroivai, those who are close to me, then can't be that their neshamas were burned up. It couldn't be that they committed such a sin that their souls were burned up, because then they never would be called those who were close to me. V'amru Razal, and our sages say, Amar Moshe la'Aaron. Moshe said to Aaron, Achi, Yodea Yisei Sheyekadesh Habayis. I knew that something would happen when the Mishkan would be built, that something would happen to sanctify the house, to sanctify the bias, to sanctify the tabernacle, to show what kind of holy place it is. And I thought something's going to happen to me or to you. Achshav, now that it happened to your sons, that means that they were greater than you and I. And he's saying this after they died. And there's no question that they have a very high place in the world to come. Because we know that their death was a kapar, was an atonement for their sins. How do you know that? Because Parshas Achrei Mos, we read in Yom Kippur, it talks about the service of Yom Kippur, and the service of Yom Kippur is mentioned Acharei Mos Shnei Bnei Aaron, after the death of the two sons of Aaron. So we have the sons of Aaron, their death being mentioned next to Yom Kippur. And what does that teach us? That teaches us that the fact that their death is mentioned near Yom Kippur, that means that they had an atonement also. And we find in the Jerusalem Talmud in Maseches Yuma, why is the death of Nadav and Avihu mentioned by Yom Kippur? To teach you that the death of the righteous atone. Now this comes in a little bit of a different direction. The same way Yom Kippur atones, the death of the righteous atone. But we're calling them the deaths of the righteous. They're saying Nadav and Avihu are an example of the death of a righteous that can atone the same way like Yom Kippur. Then that means that their death was not just a punishment for them, a destruction of them. It was actually a means of atonement for the Jewish people, or it could be an atonement for the Jewish people, which means it was certainly an atonement for them. Okay, so the first thing that Rabbeinu Bachya is bringing out is that when this fire entered inside of them, we might think the neshamas were burned. He says, chas v'shalom. No way. Not going to say that.
But neshama can be died whenever.
Excuse me?
I never heard the neshama can be died.
Yes, it can be destroyed.
Neshama can be destroyed?
Yes. A person can be wicked enough that their neshama is destroyed.
Wow.
Now, so you might have thought that's what's happening here. You might have thought that the fire going into them was a spiritual death. So he's saying it wasn't a spiritual death in the sense that the neshamas were destroyed. He says because we know they were righteous, and we know that they gained atonement for through what happened to them. So the neshamas for sure were not destroyed. Now, then he says, "V'gamein loymar shnitzra gufam babusham." You also cannot say that their bodies were burned and their clothing. Shrak kasev meyed, because the Torah testifies in Parshat Shmini that vayisa umekutanoisam, that after they died, how were they? They were removed from the Mishkan. How? So Moshe told Aaron to tell two of his nephews, I believe it was, to go ahead and carry them out by their garment, by their kutonis, by their tunic, okay, which is what the Kohanim had to wear, okay. So therefore, he says, if their bodies would have been burned, right, then you wouldn't be carrying them out by their garment, okay. And therefore he says, as he started off with, you know what happened here? What happened here was that when the fire entered them, it caused their neshama to separate from their body. But there was no destruction of their neshama, and there was no destruction of their body. Because he's assuming if there would have been a destruction of their body, then there would have been a destruction, their body would have been burnt. That means their garment would have been burned, and they couldn't have been carried out by their garment. So therefore, what his point is that what happened here was that the fire that entered them caused their neshamas to depart from their body. That's what it means.
If the neshama leaves the body, people die.
That's correct. That's what happens all the time. Okay, that's what happens all the time. And in here, it happened at this point through the fire that entered. But not that the fire actually consumed them in any way. And he says, Umisazu kara hakasav sreifa. And the Torah refers to this death as burning, because it happened through a fire. It happened through a heavenly fire. It was the fire that caused it to happen. So it's called burning. But it's not that they were burned. Okay? So the first part of Ben Abachya is establishing that what happened there by Nadav and Avihu. Now, then he goes into a different episode that we have in Tanakh. And we have this episode that he brings psukim in Yeshaya, but the story itself takes place in Malachim Beis, Kings 2, or 2 Kings, whichever way you say it in English. In Perek Yotes, chapter 19, Lamed Hey, verse 35. Now the story there is there was a king his name was Sancheirev. He was Melech Ashur, he was the king of Ashur, the king of Assyria. And he had conquered the world. And he was about to conquer Yerushalayim and destroy it in the Beis HaMikdash. And what happened is that after the king at that time was a king, Chizkiyo, the prophet at that time was Yeshaya, Isaiah. They prayed, and basically overnight, the entire army of Sancheirev died. Which, I've always looked at as, they all died in their sleep. Well, that's not what that's not the way the Rabbeinu Bachya explains it. It was similar to that, but Rabbeinu Bachya says is that similar, not exactly, but similar to what happened to Nadav and Avihu is what happened to the army of Sancheirev. Something similar happened by the death of the army of Sancheirev. And he quotes the pasuk in Yeshaya. The pasuk in Yeshaya reads, Ki kol sa'oin sa'ein barash v'simla megulala b'damim v'yser l'sreifa ma'cheles eish, which he explains means that typically when there's a battle, what happens is people die with noise and with confusion and with cries, and the garments are, sullied with blood. That's what happens typically by a battle. But here, what's going to defeat of the army of Sancheirev they'll be l'sreifa ma'cheles eish. They will be burned, consumed by fire. Meaning, the way the Rebbeinu Bachya explains the pasuk, things are not going to be like typical, where you have the screaming and the shouting and the garments of the dead sullied with blood. But rather, they're going to be burned up. Okay? It's going to be different. They're going to be burned up. And that's what it means when in Malachim we read, Vayetze Malach Hashem, an angel of God came out, Vayach B'machana Asher, and smote in the Assyrian camp, Mea Ushmaina V'chamisha Elef, 185,000 members of their army. Vayashkimu V'abayker, they woke up in the morning, V'nei Kulam Pagarim Mesim, everyone was a dead body. And he continues and he says that this plague, this death that took over Sancheirev, it came about through the power of the prayer that Chizkiah and Yeshaya prayed, which we find later, we find in a different book of Tanakh, in Divrei Hayamim, by Yispali Chizkiyahu HaMelech V'Shayahu ben Amitz Hanavi Al Zois V'Yizaku Hashemayim. They cried out to heaven, the king and the prophet. And again, V'Yishlach Hashem Malach and the Malach came and destroyed every member of the army. Now, but what happened, and he says, this is based on a pasuk, based on a verse, what he says happened is that it was similar to Nadav and Avihu, because the pasuk does talk about a fire consuming them. But it also says that there's no blood or anything on their garments, which he explains to mean that their bodies remained whole, but their neshamas were burned up. In the case of Nadav and Avihu, the neshamas weren't burned up. In this case, the neshamas were burned up, and that's how they died. But because their neshamas were burned up, the body stayed intact. And again, and he brings a pasuk, another pasuk in Yeshaya, the book of Yeshaya. It explains to mean the same idea, which was that, in essence, their bodies remained intact, their souls were burned up, and he explains a pasuk to show that that a different pasuk to show that what happened to those armies was like could happen in a forest where you have, I guess, a tree, and a worm consumes the inside of the tree, so the tree is dead, but on the outside it's whole. And that's what happened by the army of Sancheirev. The army of Sancheirev were consumed from the inside, their neshamas were burned, but their bodies stayed intact. So it's similar to Nadav and Avihu. Not exactly the same, but similar in the sense that their bodies remained intact. Nothing happened to their bodies.
But it's mentioned about fire?
No, that's the point. There's fire mentioned in the words of the prophet who describes what happened, which I understand it as not that, it says by Nadav and Avihu, a fire came down and went into them. I don't think he doesn't say that a fire came down and by the army, but it's described as a fire because it's similar to the fire of Nadav and Avihu that did not consume their bodies stayed intact. Just that in the case of Nadav and Avihu, the fire caused the soul to separate from the body. In this case, it was a malach who did it. A malach came and basically destroyed their neshamas, but their body stayed intact. And it's referred to as a burning because it's similar to what happened by Nadav and Avihu that was called burning. Okay, so Rabbeinu Bachya tells us what happened by Nadav and Avihu, and then it tells us something similar happened to the armies of Sancheirev. Now again, Sancheirev was the king of Assyria. Ashur is a descendant of Noach's son Yefes. Of the three sons, Shem, Ham, and Yefes, Assyria, Ashur, descended from Yefes. We, the descendants of Avram Avinu, we come from Shem. So now, here's the main point that we want to get to. This army were descendants of Yefes. They had the merit of the garments. It says that Shem and Yefes took a garment, they covered the nakedness of their father. They had the merit of clothing. They had the merit that because he took a garment and he covered up his father Shem, there was a reward that his descendants, that their garments and bodies would stay intact. So this episode of the fact that they died in such a way where their body stayed intact, their garments and body stayed intact, that was as a reward in merit. It was based on the merit of Yefes, who took a garment and covered his father's shame. And what was Shem's reward? The Shem shanachnu mibanav, and Shem that we are his descendants, zachal zeh lemitzvas tzitzis. We merited a garment. We merited something with a garment too. What did we merit? Tzitzis. Now, what I want to focus on is this idea about the reward, where he says that this art. He says the army was from the descendants of Yefes. They had the merit of clothing, and it was the merit of what Yefes did that because of that his descendants died in a way that their clothing and bodies were untouched, were whole.
But this is merit?
What?
Even it means there is a better way to die.
That's what it sounds like, right? It sounds like that it was a better way to die in this manner that they did than typically in the battle. Okay, so how would you understand that?
I cannot understand.
Okay, so let's talk it through.
The story, it's they are enemy of Jewish people.
Mm-hmm. And they were defeated in this way.
Yeah, it means fighting.
They didn't fight.
Not fighting, at least an enemy.
Yeah.
It should be battle, and because of prayer, probably Jewish people can be victory.
Because what?
No, because of the prayer, probably.
Yes,
in any case,
the prayer.
But because of this, they kind of save them.
It gave them a different type of defeat. But what how do you like what why is this a bet what's the point? What's the point that it's better? Now it sounds like something a little deep. So let's work through it.
Military is better to die in the battle. Usually.
Nope. But that we're not saying that, right? We're saying here that it was better. It was better to die this way. So it sounds a bit like on the mystical side, and so let's work through this. I mean, I think I have an explanation. I think, but I want to work through this first on a maybe try to come from a different idea. Now we know there is a concept that we have called kavod hames. We give honor to a dead body, right? We don't allow autopsies. We don't allow the body to be cut up unless it has to be, right? But just have an autopsy to check what happened for no really good reason. We try to avoid autopsies. We don't want the body to be cut up. Let's not get into that right now, okay? We don't want that to happen. We try to avoid that, okay? And in general, we treat a dead body with a lot of honor. We clean it, we dress it, we're
not allowed to cut.
Right. So we go ahead and we show a lot of honor to a dead body. Why? It's dead. So the way I believe I've heard explanation, the starting point is, well, the body was what contained the neshama, right? The neshama was in the body. It was how the neshama functioned in this world through a body. And therefore, because of that, it deserves honor. Okay, but that would mean that we have to honor it. That means we have to treat it with honor. That doesn't seem to apply to the army of Sancheirev. We didn't do anything there. We didn't bury them afterwards either, as far as I know. The point is how Hashem killed them. Now, another thought that I believe I've heard, and this is already a little bit more on a higher level of things, is that the neshama, because the body was its home, it's what it functioned through. If the body is mistreated, if the body is abused, the neshama suffers. The neshama suffers from that. When it sees the body mistreated, when it sees the body disgraced. But again, in this case, I don't think that's going to happen. Why? Because we said that neshamas were burned. So the neshamas weren't around to feel that. So I think the explanation is like this. I mean, if the question is a question, the answer could very well be that I'll suggest the answer is that dying the way they did, even if we say that neshamas were burned up, was a painless death. There's no pain. When you're killed in battle, right? And you get killed with a sword or whatever, there's a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. These soldiers, they died. And even if it means that their neshamas were burned up, they died. They didn't die with any pain. It was a painless death. And that's something that Yefes would have appreciated. Yefes would have been happy, would have appreciated to know that, to have it, that his descendants, if they're going to be defeated, let them be defeated in a way that's not painful. So perhaps that's the point here. Perhaps the point here is that dying this way meant they died without pain. And that was a merit because for Yefes. That Yefes would want that his descendants, if they have to die this way. And therefore, that was the merit that had it, that his descendants, those armies, as much as they were trying to destroy the Jewish people and they had to be defeated, nonetheless, they would die a painless death because of the merit of what he did for his father. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful evening.
Okay. Oh, this is